My talk today is called Rise Above It. College students talk about their spiritual development. Rise Above It. Rise Above It is the name of the book that my wife and I put together in 2000. It was this one here, and it was very, very popular because it appealed to a wide range of people. There were journal entries in it from prisoners, from children, from senior citizens, from church groups, from people who gathered around the kitchen table to talk about the experience of putting the Ten Commandments into their lives. Emanuel Swedenborg said that if a person believes in God and lives according to the Ten Commandments, that person is saved. In fact, Swedenborg said several things about the Ten Commandments. Back in 2000, my daughter Serena, way before PowerPoints, made this poster for me, which was Why the Ten Commandments. Get a head start on heaven. The life of heaven in man is living in accord with the Ten Commandments. Today we'd say the life of heaven in a person. Become an angel. To do these commandments from religion purifies the internal, opens heaven, admits the Lord, and makes the person as to his spirit an angel of heaven. Experience God's presence. To love the Lord is to keep the Ten Commandments of the Decalogue. In proportion as a person keeps and does them, in the same proportion the person loves the Lord. The reason is that the Ten Commandments are the Lord with a person. The Ten Commandments are the rules of life, both for those who are in the world and for those who are in heaven. So at the bottom here it says, you'll be keeping the Ten Commandments forever, so you might as well get started now. It's called a head start on heaven. Well, I've gotten much mileage out of this poster. I show it to my students every time I teach the course, Rise Above It, Spiritual Development Through the Ten Commandments. I taught it in the prison system in Atlanta for 3 years, from 1990 to 1993, and I've taught it here at Bernathen College since 2002, so that's another 15 years, maybe 18 years altogether of teaching this course to students, both in prison environments and in a beautiful college setting like Bernathen College. But the results are always the same. There's never an argument about doctrine. There's never a dispute about some of the intricacies of theology. It's always down to earth, keep the commandments. Everybody gets it. Everybody gets it in every religion. One of the things I do is in the book, the first book that we put out, Rise Above It, we showed how the Ten Commandments occur in all the world religions. On the back of the book, there's a quote from Swedenborg and a quote from Khalil Gibran. Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese poet, says, "The varied paths of religion are but the fingers of the loving hand of the Supreme Being extended to all." The idea is that God, in his gracious mercy, has given the Ten Commandments in various forms in every religion. You can't find a religion on earth that doesn't have some version of the Ten Commandments. So what we do in the book is we show how all of the religions converge around the Ten Commandments. And in the course I teach at Bernathen College, because it's an academic course, my students study how the Ten Commandments show up in all the world religions, but it's an application course. They show how the Ten Commandments show up in their own lives. This morning, I'm going to show you what the students actually say about the experience of putting the Ten Commandments in their lives. The book that I have now is an updated version of this one. I did this one this summer. I had 7,000 journal entries from over the past 15 years of students taking the course. From those 7,000 journal entries, I selected the cream of the crop, the very best ones, the ones that really, really showed a perception into self in relation to the commandments about how to make it through life. And I used this book this past fall for the students. It was kind of a pilot program. Out of that experience, which was the best yet because they were reading about other college students, I put together this new one right here, which you have on the screen now. Rise Above It. College students talk about their spiritual development. The previous title was Rise Above It, Spiritual Development Through the Ten Commandments. Slightly different, but this one has a very focused audience, college students. I've been trying to get this book published, and I've shopped it out to different publishers, and the answer comes back that there's no audience. They say, very interesting, it looks intriguing. I've gotten some great comments. People say amazing, wonderful, but publishers don't want it because this is the only college in the world that teaches this course. So who are they going to sell the book to? So I've got a marketing problem, and if you people would help me today, come up with ideas on how to get this marketed. I thought about changing the title. I might call it Moses and the Millennials. We actually started teaching the book around 2000. This is 2017, and it's almost this millennial generation. And it's amazing to me when you think about the idea of the Ten Commandments coming to American culture at this point in time and how the millennials are receiving it. Will they still worship the golden calf, or will they keep the commandments? That could be my marketing edge. I don't know. Anyway, let's get started. Rise Above It. College students talk about their spiritual development. The first quote in the book is this one. Strike at the root. The axe is laid to the root is a quote from Jesus. And Henry David Thoreau said, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root. What is the root? Well, the root is the 10 evils that are enumerated in the 10 Commandments. The love of adultery, the love of murder, including the love of putting other people down, the love of theft, the love of lying, the love of coveting, which relates to not just wanting what other people have, but wanting their entire lives, controlling them. So these are the evils that we have to recognize, not just in others, but in ourselves. This is striking at the root. Once we strike at the root, life becomes beautiful, and the things that are supposed to flourish do flourish. One of the challenges that I've had in the course is that students are questioning their faith. I get students who were even raised in religious families who are saying, I don't really know if there's a God. Being agnostic or atheist has actually become fashionable in the millennial age. Kind of cool to not believe. And to believe, it looks like you are just sort of following the crowd, you're a little bit square. We want to make it cool to believe. So my background is in literature, and I remember in literature classes we were asked to practice the willing suspension of disbelief. If you're going to enjoy a play, you have to pretend that you're not there, you're observing some real thing that's happening, and you are having this wonderful experience. And to the extent that you can suspend disbelief, your enjoyment is heightened. Or if you go to a movie, you say, oh, that's not really happening, they're just actors, you won't enjoy it. But if you suspend disbelief and pretend that you are watching something real happening, your joy is all the more heightened. So I say, let's try the willing suspension of disbelief in religion. Just try believing that there is a God and see what that's like. Act as if there's a loving God who cares about you, who's looking out for you, who doesn't want you to be sad or miserable, who wants the greatest happiness for you. Just pretend. One student writes, "At first, I wasn't sure whether this class is for me, since I'm not religious. But the part that enticed me to stick with it was when the instructors explained to us the willingness to believe, even just temporarily, that there is a higher power out there who guides us all in a way. The least I could do was give it a shot." By the way, when I say instructors, for many of these courses, my wife Star taught with me, and that was a true delight. And they called me Coach, and they called her Mrs. Coach. And we got the term Mrs. Coach when we went to the Bahamas one time on a service trip, and the young people there called her Mrs. Coach. And so that kind of stuck, and that was a beautiful thing. The willing suspension of disbelief. So I took their advice and gave the first couple of readings a chance. And I was immediately convinced that this was not just another class on the Ten Commandments. It was much more than that. This was a class designed to help each and every one of us develop into a better person than we were the day we walked in. It was good knowing that when I walked into class on Tuesday and Thursday, that I would be entering a room where we were being guided down a path that opened our eyes to the false gods that take away our ability to be the best people we can be. In this class, we really learn how to rise above it. The first commandment, you know, is you shall have no other gods before me. And so we talk about false gods as the first step. But let me give you the last words of the introduction to the book. As we send this new edition of Rise Above It off to the press, we want to express our deepest gratitude to the students who have given us permission to quote from their journals. Although we have changed names and a few plot details to protect anonymity, touched up minor grammatical errors, and delicately pruned longer journal entries, the words you will be reading are real, and the struggles are authentic. The result is what Professor Harvey Cox has called a guidebook on how to look beneath the daily round of classes and seminars to see the spiritual core of what for many of us turns out to be the most unforgettable period in our lives. For those of you who may not be familiar with Harvey Cox, he's one of the most famous theologians in the United States, if not in the world. I met him at a seminar many years ago and talked to him about my new book at that time on Helen Keller. He was interested, and we struck up an acquaintance. And when I was ready to publish reprint Rise Above It in 2005, I sent him a copy and asked if he would give us a blurb. Well, the blurb he gave was the one you just read. A guidebook on how to look beneath the daily round of classes and seminars to see the spiritual core of what for many of us turns out to be the most unforgettable period in our lives. He was talking about some book that was for college students. Wasn't actually talking about the book that I had sent him, but I thought, this is good. I'm going to save this for some future date when we do the Rise Above a book for college students. I think Professor Cox was being prophetic. Of course, I'll have to contact him again to see if I can recycle his quote, but it's such a good one, I wanted to use it. I've got another quote here, too, that isn't directly about the book, but it could be. This is from the Pope. It's one of my favorite quotes. And this was 2000, Pope John Paul II, from a speech given at the foot of Mount Sinai, February 26, 2000. What the Pope says here is exactly at the center of what I want to get at today. I don't think the Pope was necessarily being prophetic. He was just speaking the truth for all ages. And here it is. The Ten Commandments are not an arbitrary imposition by a tyrannical Lord. They were written in stone. But before that, they were written on the human heart as the universal moral law, valid in every time and place. Today, as always, the 10 words of the law provide the only true basis for the lives of individuals, societies, and nations. Today, as always, they are the only future of the human family. They save man from the destructive force of egoism, hatred, and falsehood. They point out all the false gods that draw him into slavery, the love of self to the exclusion of God, the greed for power and pleasure that overturns the order of justice and degrades our human dignity and that of our neighbor. If we turn from these false idols and follow the God who sets his people free and remain always with them, then we shall emerge like Moses after 40 days on the mountain, shining with glory, ablaze with the light of God. Thank you, Pope John Paul II. We go from John Paul's quote directly into the first commandment, which begins with, these are the words of God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the house of bondage, brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. As I mentioned, I was teaching this course in a maximum security prison in Atlanta, Georgia in 1993. The course was actually funded by a Pell Grant through Mercer University, and the students were working towards a degree in human resources management at Mercer at the time. And I was asked to teach a course on Christian ethics, and Mercer at the time was a Baptist university. So I was thinking, Christian ethics, what would that be? They had a textbook for the course, but I thought maybe we should just go with what Jesus said, since it's Christian ethics. So the first question I asked the class was this one, and here's how I asked it. I said, a rich young ruler came to Jesus one day and said, good master, what good thing shall I do that I might enter into life? And I said, well, what did Jesus tell him? And now there were maybe 25 or 30 men in the class. To get the picture, they had their white uniforms and their blue stripes, and many raised in a Baptist background. So they pretty much knew, and they raised their hands and Jesus said, sell what you have and give to the poor. I said, as any good teacher would, that's a very good answer, and it's very close. He said that 3 or 4 verses later, but that's not what he said immediately to the question. And they were quiet. And I said, does anybody know what he said right after he was asked the question? What good thing shall I do that I might inherit eternal life? With no answer. I said, well, he said, first of all, there is only one who is good, that is God. But if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. And then the rich young ruler said, well, which ones? And Jesus took him right back to honor your father and mother, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not lie. Does it sound familiar? Jesus took him back to the 10 Commandments. And so I said, this course is going to be a course on Christian ethics, and the Christian ethics are going to be the ones that Jesus prescribed. Keep the commandments. And so we started with the commandments. And this first one is, you shall have no other gods before me, from the journal of a maximum security prisoner who took the Rise Above It course in 1993. While on the streets, my God was alcohol. Is it still up there? Yes. I did everything for that God and loved it with all my heart, soul, and mind. I went to work to make money to give to my God, and I did give generously. When I had problems in my life or felt angry about someone or something, I'd go directly to my God for comfort. When something good happened in my life, it was time to celebrate with my God. It was the center of my life. It was my life. I'd worship my God and do whatever it wanted me to do because it was in total control of me. So this was an amazing journal entry that became also the first journal entry in the original book. Generations now have read that and have taken it into their own lives as college students, and you'll be amazed to see what they come up with. This college student writes, "The lessons learned this week have helped me to identify my own false gods, and I have learned that one of the first steps is to name it. So here goes. This week I called my mom to ask her about any bad habits I might have, as you suggested in class, and she was honest with me. By the way, we live in the cell phone era. It's very hard to get through a college class without someone taking out their cell phone. It's even hard for me now when I hear it buzzing on my hip. So we're immersed in that. So I thought, well, let's use them. So I was talking about false gods and talking about the fact that sometimes we're blind to our own faults, but people who know us could really help us with this. So if you're willing, take out your cell phones and call someone you know and trust and ask them if you have any faults or any areas where you need improvement. And you wouldn't believe how many of them got on their phones right away and started calling and telling class, my mom says, my girlfriend says, my brother says, and we were immensely helped by this technological aid. So she did the same. She contacted her mom. She said, when anything goes wrong in your life, you always reach for alcohol. Now, this is a student maybe 19 or 20 years old, already on the path to alcoholism. Maybe not there yet, but this idea is something goes wrong, go for some comfort. When anything goes wrong in your life, you always reach for fill in the blank. In this case, it's alcohol. I had to admit that she was right. I worship alcohol. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And the truth is that I treasure alcohol, so that's where my heart is. So I left a little blank there for any of you to fill in. Let's say it again. When anything goes wrong in your life, you always reach for. Here's one that many people have been reaching for years, coming up. I always thought that I could control cigarettes. I didn't believe that one day this habit would control me. Even when I wake up, my first thought is to have a cigarette. It's like I'm worshiping at the altar of nicotine and sending up my prayers of devotion in clouds of smoke. Written by a college student, many people begin their nicotine addiction in college, or their alcohol addiction. I feel almost missionary about how important it is to get this message to college students early before these addictions get a hold of them and rule over them. You know, it begins, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. We don't want them to even get into bondage, but we're going to hear some more forms of bondage coming up. This is another student. Each different drug I did gave me another emotion, another talent. Coke made me feel invincible. Weed made me feel peaceful. Mushrooms made me fun-loving. LSD made me able to imagine. But these feelings were short-lived, and after the drug lost its effect, I would go back to feeling depressed. In fact, I felt worse than ever. In pretending to give me life, these drugs were slowly taking it away from me. I wonder if that last sentence should be read again just to sink in. In pretending to give me life, these drugs were slowly taking it away from me. Well, what's going on here? People who've studied in the field of addictions say that whatever the addiction is, it comes down to one central factor. and it's this: a refusal to deal with reality. Here's a quote from Jason Danner. "The alcoholic's most basic problem is a desire to run the whole show. Implicit in this desire to run the show is a rejection of how things are, a refusal to deal with reality on his terms." So, whatever it is, whatever comes up in our life, that is a challenge to help us grow. And there's a kind of excitement in just dealing with the reality that comes our way, rather than taking refuge or escaping into whatever our form of comfort is. We're here to fight the good fight. William Butler Yeats said, "Why do we honor those who die in the field of battle? A man shows as reckless a courage in entering into the abyss of himself." One of the ways that we help the students to identify their false gods and get some sort of handle on how to control it is by naming it. Rumpelstiltskin, the famous story of the man who, the little man or the little elf or whatever you want to call him, little dwarf, lots of versions of the story, but his name was Rumpelstiltskin. And the only way he could stop terrorizing the young girl who was spinning straw into gold was to say his name. And ultimately, at the end of the story, if she didn't say his name, she would have to give him her firstborn. By chance, someone heard the little man laughing and dancing around and saying, and it's a German fairy tale, "Ich bin Rumpelstiltskin," and someone heard that and told her. And so he came back now to get the child and ruin her life. And she said, "Oh no, du bist Rumpelstiltskin. You are Rumpelstiltskin." And he fled off, and there's different versions of the story. He pounded into the ground, and he pounded so hard that he fell into a hole, or he ran off never to be found again. The point is that she was no longer terrorized by Rumpelstiltskin because he named her. She named him. And there's a certain power in naming our false god. This one girl in class decided to do this, and she named her false god Scorn. Here's what she did. She said, "My false god is scorn, and it demands a full and varied diet of daily sacrifices. I sacrifice people I don't know and people I'm close to. I find myself sacrificing all kinds of people: dumb people, super smart people, pretty people, ugly people, weak people, tough people, people who don't write well, overachievers, underachievers, you name it, and I feed it to my God. It's hard to escape my altar of sacrifice. The problem with this God is that he is like my fish. The more I feed him, the hungrier he gets." And that's the story of all addictions. The more you indulge it, the stronger it becomes. Let's see. Okay, here's another false god: self-absorption. Now, at the end of each chapter, we ask the students to apply these lessons to their own life, keep a journal, and come back to class and share it with the rest of the class if they feel comfortable. I also tell them, there's a difference between what's private and what's personal. They can share a personal story as something that happened to them, but if it's private, they may want to just keep it themselves. So you're going to hear lots of personal stories today that the students were willing to share as long as I kept them anonymous. And so I've changed different details to make sure that these stories will remain anonymous. Plus, as you know, I taught this course in the prison system, at Bryn College. I taught it at Lincoln University, and I taught it online through the Graduate Theological Foundation. So you won't be able to pin something to a specific college, luckily. Okay. So this was one of their first assignments. So when the book comes out, there's about 6 or 7 options they can do at the end of every chapter or at the end of every commandment. This one says, self-absorbed people are so consumed with their own issues that they have little interest in the lives of others and little time for anyone except themselves. To the self-absorbed person, minor issues in one's life loom large, and big issues in the lives of others seem to have little or no significance. This kind of self-absorption manifests in small ways, such as not bothering to hold doors for people, not smiling in a friendly way when on the checkout line at a store, not acknowledging family members, or even saying hello to people in one's dorm or class. Self-absorbed people tend to be oblivious to everyone around them, except when they might get some benefit from being aware of another person. How does the false god of self-absorption manifest in your life? It's amazing to me, working on a college campus, you walk across the campus and you get a real sense of who's self-absorbed and who's not, who has a moment to smile and say hi, and who'll just walk by absorbed in their own world. And they may be absorbed in their own world for a really good reason. Maybe something serious happened in their life. But it's not always like that. The other day I was at Wawa, and Wawa is one of the friendliest places in the world. People hold the door for you. It's so nice. I've never been to Wawa with someone didn't. I don't know what it is. Maybe that's why we should do church in the future. Wawa. It's the parking lot's pretty full. But just and I thought, this is a crazy thought, but I thought, wouldn't it be great to do a study? Just sit out there by Wawa with a pencil and a paper and just do a statistical survey of how many people open the door, how many people smile. It just, I don't know what it is, but it's a nice thing. But it doesn't happen everywhere. It'd be great if it did. It'd be great if people could be out of themselves long enough to be open for other people. Well, when I finish each chapter, or when we're studying the chapter, actually, the students also study world religions. And they look at how each commandment shows up in one of the world religions. So I have 5 major religions, and then because I teach at a new church college, this is Bryn Athyn College of the New Church, and it's faith-based and based on the teachings of Emanuel Swedenborg. I include Swedenborg's teachings, especially because he represents the esoteric tradition in Christianity. He shows the inner meaning of each of the commandments, not just the literal meaning, but the deeper meaning that has universal application. So I'll show you how that goes. Here's how we do it. We start off with these 5: Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and the New Church. And then we go through each one. I'll do this for the first 3 commandments, and then for the rest of the commandments, I won't be showing how they show up in world religions. But these initial commandments are especially important to show how they show up in all the world religions in one way or another. So here's the first one from Judaism, from the Hebrew Scriptures, Exodus 20. And God spoke all these words: I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not bow down. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. Now, there are many traditions that treat this as the first commandment, and there are many traditions that treat this as 2 commandments. The first one about no other gods, and the second one about idols. In my course, I treat this as just 1 commandment and bring it together as there's one God and there's lots of false gods, and we should really be serving the one God and bowing down to that one God and not bowing down to any false gods. So that's just, and I have many, many more teachings from Judaism on no other gods before me, but for the purpose of this lecture, I've just shown you little glimpses. Here's Christianity. Jesus, his third temptation in the wilderness. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the mountains of the world and their splendor. All this I will give you, he said, if you will bow down and worship me. Of course, the devil's a liar. Satan's a liar. You know, he doesn't have anything to give, but he thinks he can. Jesus said to him, away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. So Jesus is going right back to the first commandment. And here's Buddhism. Now, Buddhism can get very tricky because Buddhists say, well, there's no God in Buddhism. The actual fact is that the Buddha didn't believe in theories. He believed in life. He didn't want people to get caught up in abstractions and theories, but he believed in life. And he taught the commandments. He didn't call them commandments, but when you go through Buddhism, you see that Buddha is continually saying the same things that are taught in the Ten Commandments. Here, from the most famous collection of Buddha's teachings, the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada basically means the path of virtue, Dhammapada, or the doctrine of the Buddha. And this is chapter 1, verse 7. As the wind throws down a tree of little strength, so indeed does Mara, the tempter, overthrow him who lives looking for pleasures, uncontrolled in his senses, immoderate in eating, lazy, and of low vitality. I especially like those words, immoderate in eating, lazy, and of low vitality. If you teach a 8 o'clock class at college, you'll see a lot of low vitality. And it could be from being immoderate in eating, I don't know. But so I call myself coach because I coach spiritual athletes. I can't play the game for them, but I can coach them. So I say, good passage for those who bow down to false gods of procrastination, overeating, and general laziness. By the way, now for 16 years, I have asked my students to list false gods in their life. And can you guess what the number one false god they always list every single year? Things change, but this does not change. The number one false god is procrastination. They start off every term and say, I'm going to get it right this time. I'm going to get all good grades. I'm going to do my studying. And one thing after another gets them, distracts them, and they wind up procrastinating. Chapter 20, verse 8. He who does not get up when it's time to get up. I mean, it's like the Buddha was speaking to today's college youth. He who does not get up when it's time to get up, who, though young and strong, is full of sloth. I can't believe this. I come into class, and I'm in my 70s now, and I'm feeling vibrant, and these kids are, and they're only 19 and 20. What happened? He who does not get up when it's time to get up, who though young and strong is full of sloth, who is weak in resolution and thought, that lazy and idle man will not find the way to wisdom. Buddha's saying here it's going to take some effort. You're not just going to get smart by saying, I love everybody, and go back to sleep. No, you've got to learn. You've got to learn. So I say, good passage for those who tend to oversleep. I put it very nicely. And are late for classes and other appointments. Especially good for everyone who lacks self-discipline. I mean, this is good for all of us. And then we come to a passage from the teachings of the New Church. This one is from the True Christian Religion, a work by Emanuel Swedenborg. He says, anyone or anything which is loved above all is to the lover God and divine. For instance, if anyone loves himself or the world above all else, then he or the world is his own God. And that's a very, very powerful passage, Who do you really love? Yourself or others. Next commandment. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Now, most people understand that this is like saying OMG. You all know what OMG means? What does OMG mean? Oh, you just took the Lord's name in vain. Well, not really. He said, oh my God. Now, students sometimes wonder about that. They say, ever since I was little, I was told not to use the Lord's name or not swear. All this is taking the Lord's name in vain. So we have someone with their mouth taped up with the stop sign there. Do not take the Lord's name in vain. But here a student raises an interesting question. The other day in class, we talked about the name of God. Taking the Lord's name in vain is something I actively try to avoid, but sometimes it just slips out. For example, if I were to see Niagara Falls, I would probably exclaim, oh my God, out of reveling in the beauty of what God has created. I feel in that circumstance it is appropriate. What do you think? You want to take a moment and just talk to your neighbor and ask what your neighbor thinks? If you're not sitting near a neighbor, you can just go sit near someone too. That's okay. Yeah. Oh. Well, when I first came to the Bryn Athyn community, where Bryn Athyn College is, I wasn't familiar with the culture of the community. So I would say things like, oh my God. And a good friend said, Ray, better not say that. You don't say that around here because that's not the culture of this community. So I learned. And actually, I like that. I save the name of God for what's really reverent, what's really special, and what's holy. Now, if this young man truly was having a religious experience, he'd say, oh my God, you created this almost in the form of prayer. I'd say, fine, that's beautiful. But if it's just sort of a habit of speech that makes God just mundane like pizza, well, maybe you could work on that. But that's only the very literal level of this commandment. Let's go just a little bit deeper. A little bit deeper is, I ask the students to reflect on, what does this mean, name of God? What does your name mean? And it's so beautiful to see the students reflecting on their name. Yesterday, I had a new granddaughter born, and they named her Theodora. And my son was so happy. He said, this means gift of God. And he had an awareness of what name means. And to him, this child is going to be a gift of God. You might all reflect on your names and why were you named what you were named? What does that name mean to you? Or what connotation has that name taken on over the years? Names are really significant. There was a young girl in my class, I thought her name was Jazoleel, and I always called her Jazoleel. But she wrote in her journal that her name was not Jazoleel, her name was Yasoleo. And here's what she said. When I was younger, my dad said to me, Yasoleo, you should know that your name is God-given. It means light of God. My father is a devout Rastafarian, and he gave me that name. He said it came to him in a dream, and I loved that. He said, no matter what, you will always be the light that the Lord has sent into the world. I took this to mean that I should always live up to my divine duty to fight through any battle and overcome any obstacle. As long as I did that, I would never be taking the Lord's name in vain, my name. By the way, I sent an email to Jazoleel, who graduated a few years ago, and said, everything's anonymous in here, but I can't make your name anonymous. And I sent her this, and she said, "Oh, I'm so proud of that. Thank you very much." I read her the whole thing, including this part. "The truth is, though, that I have taken the Lord's name in vain. I have not lived up to my divine duty and have not always lived as though I am Yah Solel, the light of God. But this commandment is helping me to get back on the path, to remember my name and to continue to remember that I want to live up to my name. I want to bring light to others, not darkness. When I say or hear my name called, I want to remember that I am here for a purpose, and that is to glorify God's name." Can you feel the power in those words and the pride and the joy that she now feels once again in terms of the meaning of her name? Well, in talking about names, it's very, very important that the students understand the power of holy names. Jesus said, if you call on my name, you shall be saved. And throughout the religious traditions, the name of God is always most holy. So I won't do this very often, but I do have little sections from the book that's my writing, not the student's writing. So here's something I wrote in the book. I called it Comment from Coach. When we speak of God as the creator or savior or redeemer, many wonderful ideas come to mind. But these are general concepts. If we get more specific, we begin to realize that God's name represents every holy quality we could ever think of. For example, God's name is mercy, love, forgiveness, patience, and peace. When we look at it this way, the name of God takes on so much more meaning. It's not just about God's name, it's about God's qualities. And that realization can help us realize why God's name is holy and why Jesus in the second verse of the Lord's Prayer says, "Hallowed be thy name." And by the way, I should say, in the first publication of the book, my wife and I lined up every commandment with a verse from the Lord's Prayer. For example, "You shall have no gods before me, our Father who art in the heavens. You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. Hallowed be thy name." And as you get deeper and deeper into the commandments and deeper into the Lord's Prayer, you see that it's the exact same truth that's being conveyed to us. It's miraculous. Well, one of the students took this very much to heart, this idea of God's name, and how do you access these qualities? How do you get these qualities into your life? We know that God is, and however we conceive of God, the source of every wonderful quality. Well, how do you go from this infinite God that pervades the universe, or this power that's everywhere with love and wisdom and patience and understanding, forgiveness? How do you access that? This next student calls her journal entry, "Accessing God's Arsenal." Last week, we were asked to recognize the false gods that are actively present in our lives. But recognizing these false gods is only the first step. There are still many battles ahead. So this next commandment is about building up our arsenal in order to hold our ground in this fight. It is easy to fall under the impression that we do not have the numbers or the firepower on our side. I have felt this way before. I have felt that there is little hope. But then I realized that there is more help available than I realized. She continues, "There are two sides in every war. This week I sat down to write out a list of the false gods that are in my life. That's one side of the battle. Then I wrote down another list of the qualities from God, the name of God, that I need to access in order to overcome these false gods. The battle seems to be an evenly matched one, and I never know which side will win. But I keep forgetting that I don't have to fight all my battles alone. God makes himself present through friends, family, and the situations I experience. I may be thinking I am leading the struggle against the demons of my lower nature, but in reality, I am only a fraction of the front line. It is the people who love me who are the reinforcements, the ones who fill in the gaps in my army. Of course, all of this comes from God's love." she continues. One of my favorite quotes is, "Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone who asks receives, and whoever seeks shall find. And to those who knock, it shall be opened." Our true arsenal is the Lord. The qualities of God and the influx of continuous love from God have the strength to overcome false gods, but only if we want it, only if we ask. And that means that the only way to access this ultimate arsenal is through prayer. When we decide to pray, we are admitting to ourselves and to God that we need His help, support, and guidance. Opening ourselves up to receive the qualities of God is our most important military maneuver in our personal war against false gods. Only then can we say with full confidence, "I will fight this battle in the name of the Lord." So again, at the end of each study, we take a week to study, or even more sometimes, each commandment. At the end of the study of that commandment, there is an assignment. And in this case, the assignment is simply, "You shall not take the Lord's name in vain." So I give them the example, if you were given a new bicycle for your birthday and you took it, but you let it rust in the rain, didn't use it, you'd be taking that bicycle in vain. If you were given a new dress and you took it but left it crumpled up in the closet and didn't use it, you'd be taking that dress in vain. So here's God offering us the entire kingdom of love and wisdom, and we take it in vain. So the task is to make use of the Lord's name. Put up sticky notes in key places to remind you to access your higher power or call upon the Lord, the name of the Lord. And by the way, I keep using higher power for the students who are playing the game of willing suspension of disbelief, but aren't ready to have a specific name for God yet. So they can still say how the higher power who provides all these qualities. If sticky notes are not available, you can use paper and tape. Put the notes in key places, those places where you may need to be reminded most often to call upon the name of the Lord. This is your opportunity to access the arsenal of noble qualities that are always available to you. In the past, students have put sticky notes on their phones, on their computers, on their textbooks, in their wallets, on the bathroom mirror, and on the doorway going out of their dorm room. Choose the places that are most strategic for you. Call upon the name of the Lord. In the book, there are wonderful examples of students who have put the sticky notes up in unusual places, thinking, I'm just going to do this. You know, it's one of Coach's crazy assignments. And they realized that it was almost like an awakening for them to realize that there were times in their life where they really needed to pray and forgot that tool was always available to them, and it worked for them. And they got so much out of it. You know, I can't share all the stories with you in the short time we have together, but I would love to. So then, once again, I ground everything that's said in the chapter in readings from the sacred scriptures. So these now are focused on the name of God. From the Hebrew scriptures of Judaism, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain." You know, and that, you know, if you want to get theological about that, you could say, you know, what does that mean? Well, it simply means that you can't blame God for not taking what he's given you. He will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. "Rejoice in the Lord, you righteous, and give thanks at the remembrance of his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name." And so in the Hebrew scriptures, you really get the holiness of God's name. Not the kind of holiness that, you know, we must sit still and say nothing and wear your best clothes, which is a way of reverencing God, but making use of the qualities that are abundantly available. That's what's holy. Here's Christianity. "Wherever 2 or 3 of you are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of you. Where there is love, where there is a sharing of noble qualities, where people are gathered together in that way. God is present. And whatever you shall ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If ye shall ask anything in my name, I will do it. One of Jesus' wonderful promises. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it. How about Islam? Every single surah except one begins with the words, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. He is God. This is from the Quran. He is God, the creator, the evolver, the bestower of forms. To him belong the most beautiful names. And here's a message from me to the students. Every chapter of the Quran, except chapter 9, begins with the words, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. According to Islamic scholars, the names or qualities of God are infinite. But the two qualities, most gracious and most merciful, sum up the entire Quran and the essence of God. Hinduism, from the classic text, the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 10, the Supreme Lord said, discrimination, knowledge, non-delusion, forgiveness, truthfulness, control over the mind and senses, fearlessness, non-violence, equanimity, contentment, austerity, charity, all these diverse qualities in human beings arise from me alone. Once again, the various names of God refer to the Lord's divine qualities. Every quality that is truly human has its origin in God. Buddhism, back to the Dhammapada, even if he recites a large number of scriptural texts, but being slothful does not act accordingly, he is like a cowherd counting the cows of others. He is not living a holy life. And my comment on that is, in other words, he may know all about goodness and truth, but does not put these teachings into practice. In biblical terms, he is taking the Lord's name or the Lord's teachings in vain. And from another text, we read, those who have reached the end of suffering have done so because they have performed according to what the Buddha taught. This is the way great souls and great seers have lived. And my comment there is, notice the direct link between the knowledge of what the Buddha teaches and living in accordance with that knowledge. This is another way of saying that we should not take the name of the Lord, the teachings, in vain. We should use them in our life. In doing so, we develop Buddha-like qualities, also called our Buddha nature. And then from the readings of the New Church, from True Christian Religion number 300, the name of anyone means not only his name, but also his whole quality, that is, his essential character. In the spiritual world, no one retains the name which he received in this world at baptism, or from his father and ancestry, but everyone is named according to his characteristic quality, and so angels are named according to their moral and spiritual life. These also are meant by these words of the Lord, I am the good shepherd. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. A very powerful passage in terms of the Lord has created you for a specific purpose, and that's who you are, that's your essence, those are your qualities, that's your holy name. Well, what would be the next commandment after this? The next commandment in the series is to remember the Sabbath. Do you remember the Lord's Prayer? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done. That's a state of peace. That's a state of rest. Coming of the Lord's kingdom into you, and you're doing it, brings about the Sabbath of peace. Remember the Sabbath. Here are the students writing about their experience of keeping the Sabbath. When I first got the assignment to keep the Sabbath holy, I was a little intimidated by the challenge. I had not been to a church service since high school, and I was already a junior in college. Sundays oh, by the way, did you catch that? I had not been to a church service since high school, and I was already a junior in college. Almost 3 years had gone by, And it's college experience, much too busy. And Sunday is at least the time to sleep in or catch up on homework or visit, but, religion, church, temple, whatever it is, not happening for this one anyway. Sundays at college are homework days for me and seemingly for many others. There are days when nothing much really happens. You sleep in, you talk to friends, you complain about the rough week ahead. That is what defines Sunday for me for almost 3 years of my life. So imagine how I felt getting handed this assignment all of a sudden. Not that I didn't expect it, of course. And by the way, the words remember the Sabbath. I remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. And the seventh day is the Sabbath. You shall do no work, neither you, nor your manservants, nor your maidservants, nor your animals, no work. And no work meant no work. And it also came to mean, especially in the Christian tradition, go to church. So here's what happened. The student found his way to a local church, feeling uneasy because it had been so long since he had been to church. The sermon was about being open to God and letting Him lead us. As I sat there soaking in everything the minister said through the echoing mic, a sort of peace came over me. It felt right. I was connecting with God again for the first time in years. After the sermon ended, I left the building and noticed just how nice the day was. The sun was warm on my back. The birds were locked in harmonious conversation in the trees. And the grass was very green and cushioned my feet as I walked. The world seemed brighter and more cheerful. I felt reawakened. Even though I know that every day can be a Sabbath, I will work to keep this day holy more and more. It feels very fulfilling to do so. It has brought me a peace of mind that I have never felt until now, even if my homework is still unfinished. Another student writes, the problems may never disappear, including homework, but we can see them differently. Putting my trust in the Lord will not speed up traffic or make money appear on my dresser, although sometimes I wish it would, but it does create an opportunity for the Lord to flow in with hope and love despite what is happening at the moment. My peace or Sabbath always comes when I realize that everything is in the Lord's hands, and no matter what is happening, it will all work out. As they say, true peace is not freedom from the storm. It is peace within the storm. One of the things that we do in the course is we ask the students to choose a piece of sacred scripture. It could be from any scripture in the world, but something that they regard as in some way a form of revelation or something holy. Write it down on a piece of paper and carry it with them through the day and see how it shows up to help them. See how it's God speaking to them. And invariably, wonderful things occur. Here's one sample. Here's my quote. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. I chose this quote because every time I read it, it boosts my faith in the Lord. So today, throughout the day, I would read it or think about it whenever I was having a hard moment or a moment of total exhaustion, and it would allow me to finish the task in hand. For example, it helped me to get through the history of civilization class today. This was a great exercise. I plan to carry this quote in my purse always. So, I mean, that's something that we could all do, just write it down, keep it with you. We live in the information age where there's all kinds of things coming at us all the time, almost like a flood. But just one little snippet, that's all, one little mustard seed of truth, and keep it during the day. That was so beautiful. So, as I said, for the first 2 commandments, again for this one, remember the Sabbath, there is always an assignment. Now, we give them 7 or 8 choices, but here's one of them. This is called Let God Do the Work. And by the way, this comes out of years of teaching this course and it not always going the way I wanted it to go. In the beginning, students their Sabbath would be watching Netflix all day because it was so restful. So I had to make sure that it was something at a little higher level than that. So I wrote, some students get recharged by watching athletic events, jogging around campus, or hanging out with friends. Others enjoy playing video games, watching Netflix, surfing the net, or just sleeping in after a busy week. I wanted them to know that's not exactly what is meant by a Sabbath here. While these recreational, relaxing activities are important, the focus of this commandment is about connecting with God. God becomes the doer, capital D, doer, and you become the vehicle through whom the work is done. This is what it means to do no work on the Sabbath. Your assignment then is to let God do the work through you. Put aside your ego concerns, your worries, your fears, and your doubts, so that God can work through you, and you will experience rest for your soul and renewal of your spirit. And that will be your Sabbath. Then I always have to deal with the ones who are saying, well, I'm working with the willing suspension of disbelief, but these commandments seem to be all about God. And I'd like to believe that, there's a God. That would be nice, but couldn't it just be like a force in the universe? And I say, yeah, you could do that. So I say, if the idea of God is still a problem for you, just remember that there is a benevolent force in the universe that is seeking to work through you and give you rest. In other words, you are not entirely on your own, and it's not entirely about self-effort. As they say in Star Wars, may the Force be with you. And may the Force, God, be with you, and may every moment be a Sabbath. In the spirit of the Sabbath commandment, okay, we've got 1 more hour to go, and in the next hour I'm going to do all the rest of the commandments. There was something I wanted to do on the Sabbath commandment, and that'll sort of cap that one off, and something that the students love. You know how the Buddha always spoke about nirvana. And nirvana is also not just in Buddhism, it's in Hinduism, and it's in many of the Eastern approaches to religion. And nirvana seems to be just a nothingness. And who wants to go into a nothingness, like sleeping without dreaming? But that's not what nirvana means. Nirvana is equivalent to the Sabbath. And the way to have nirvana on earth, I like to demonstrate with this candle. So the flame represents, for the moment here, our ego, our attachments, our desire to have things go our way. And as long as we have that anxious desire to have things go our way, we can never really be free of suffering, which is a very Eastern phrase. We want to be free of suffering. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So in order to be free, we want to come into this state of trusting as in Hinduism that God is the doer. From the Bhagavad Gita, I do nothing. It's just a kind of a beautiful idea that God does it all. It doesn't mean that we get out of the way. It means that God works through us. And the word nirvana means, in Sanskrit, vana is to blow, and nir is out or nothing. So I have the candle, and I nirvana it. And there it is. All of our anxious desires gone. And it's just so wonderful to see the smoke go up. And now we're open and receptive. Like Jesus said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So getting our anxiousness, our selfishness, our self-absorption out of the way is what opens us to the fullness of the kingdom. Okay, so that pretty much takes care of the first table of the Ten Commandments. The first table really relates to our relationship to the divine. And then we move into the second table, which is about our relationship to the neighbor. They asked Jesus once, well, what's the greatest commandment? And he said, well, the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Well, who's our first neighbor? The first neighbor we have is our parents. You couldn't be closer to your mother in the womb, for example. It's a neighbor in a very physical sense. And so the commandment is, honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Notice the wording, thy days may be long upon the land. Now, in the literal sense, that sounds like you're going to have longevity. You're going to live a long time. But as we get deeper into the meaning of this commandment, you'll see that these words are sacred. Sacred meaning they have infinite depths of meaning. But let's look at what the students said in terms of keeping this commandment in their life. I dreaded writing about this commandment. I sat motionless, staring at my blank computer screen. The flashing cursor stared right back at me. I soon noticed every time I began to type, I would end up pressing endlessly on the backspace key. I finally got around to writing this first paragraph by reminding myself that this commandment is about honoring your mother and father, not about expressing negative thoughts about the past. Now, this particular young lady had a problem honoring her mother because her mother had walked out on the family early in her life, and she had a lifelong resentment towards her. And so this is why she was dreading this commandment. When I was teaching in the prisons, I also taught in the female prisons. A young lady came up to me and said, you can't ask me to honor my father because the only time he ever said he loved me was just before he raped me. So people have some very serious and real issues with this commandment. And nevertheless, it's a commandment given to us for our health and our healing. So let's see how this one continues. I needed help from the Lord on this commandment. I needed the strength to find something positive to say about my mother. That's why I chose the quote from Leviticus, whoever curses father or mother shall be put to death. I knew I needed something that strong to get me motivated. She continues, now I did not take this quote for its literal meaning that I would be put to death for my feelings toward my mother. I read this quote and looked for the spiritual meaning that I could put myself into spiritual death by holding on to these negative views about someone I should love. I could write about how much my dad has supported, loved, and given me the world, but this class is not about doing what is easy. It's about doing what is right. I just love that. This class is not about doing what is easy. It's doing what is right. So I set forth a challenge for myself. The challenge is to rise above the feelings I have towards my mother. I don't know if you're with me on feeling the effort that these students are putting into doing this work. This isn't like, oh, just take the class, sit in, sleep through, take the test. No, they are putting these teachings into their life. So here's what she does. I want to honor my mother for the beautiful woman she is. I may never understand the many reasons that caused her to leave the family, but I do know that she is a rare gem whose light shines wherever she goes. Her laugh, her smile is contagious. I have never met anyone with such radiance when she walks into a room. She is also honest, and I like to believe that I get my honesty from her. She tells it like it is. Mom, does this dress look good on me? No. This one would look better. She continues, I often argue with myself, wondering if I am now the one being cruel to my mother, being emotionally distant from her as punishment for leaving me. Every time I visit, she genuinely tries to connect with me, but there is something always holding me back. I can't allow myself to get close to her again, just because of the doubt in my mind that she might leave me again. So now she's struggling, and she's sharing this struggle, and she shared this struggle with the class too, that she'd like to try to get close to her mother. She'd like to rise above the resentment that she has, but it's difficult. So she writes further, it's all going to be different now. It's not her anymore. It's me. It's the old feelings that I have toward my mother. I need to rise above these false gods. You know, this is a course that's cumulative. It isn't like we're done with the first commandment, but the first commandment is foundational to everything else. She says, I need to rise above these false gods, these fears, doubts, and hurt that prevent me from connecting with Mom. But I especially need to rise above the false god of resentment. I must not allow my negative feelings, my spiritual death, to take us both down. Instead, I want to revive this relationship and build a new spiritual life together. I want my days to be long in the promised land of love and gratitude. And here she goes deeper with the idea of what days mean. In sacred scripture, a day is not just a physical day, but it's a state of being. It's a state of love and wisdom. And just like in the natural world, when the days are long, the nights are short. And so spiritually, when we come more and more into love and wisdom, there's less and less time spent in the darkness of hatred, in the darkness of ignorance, and the coldness of hatred. Then she finishes up. Writing this journal entry was a struggle, but when she was done, her final words described the blessings that poured in through keeping this commandment. She wrote, that felt nice. You're going to see as we go through the rest of the commandments now, the blessings that pour in and the different ways that the students describe the blessings that pour in when they keep the commandments. The Buddha said when you're willing to let go of a lower pleasure, you receive a higher pleasure. When you're willing to let go of a lower happiness, you receive a higher happiness. And this will be throughout. I will spend more time with the journal entries now, and I won't spend as much time on showing where all of the world religions say something similar, because these are pretty self-evident. Every world religion says honor your father and mother. Every world religion talks about not murdering, not stealing, not lying, not committing adultery. So I'm just pretty much from here on out sticking what the students have to say as they reflect on their lives in relation to these commandments. So here is the assignment. Honor your father and mother. Very straightforward. Nothing too hard or too complex about this. Well, I shouldn't say hard. Nothing too complex about this. That's your assignment, not just because it's a commandment, but because it will open you to receiving every blessing associated with this spiritual practice. Begin with your biological parents, striving to see good qualities in them, and then broaden this to include everyone who has supported and nurtured you along the way. If you do this, your days will be long in the land that God is giving you, the land of thanksgiving, appreciation, and gratitude. And we did a little acronym. We called it TAG. Play tag. Spend time appreciating your parents and appreciating everyone who has been like a spiritual parent to you, who has nurtured you. Maybe a former coach or an aunt or an uncle or a teacher or a friend or a relative, and what we do in this one is we have them actually write letters. Oh, Moses and the millennials? Even my best students say, where do you put the return address? Where do you get a stamp? It's becoming a little harder to write letters, so we are saying, okay, we'll send an email, we'll send a text. Oh, phew. But there is still something about a letter, and the parents who receive the letters, students come back to class with the letters, with comments of what their parents said about receiving letters of gratitude. It meant so much to them. So everyone is blessed. The students writing the letters and the parents receiving them. Letters of gratitude, thanksgiving, appreciation. Well, the next commandment tends to be a favorite because it's a wake-up call for so many people. And it's this one. You shall not murder. Now, every commandment has a positive side, which is, well, if you're not murdering people, you're not criticizing them, you're not putting them down, if you're striving to not do those things, you open yourself to receiving what flows in from God, and you get to be a life giver to others. So a student writes, this commandment has been close to my heart for years. I understand that murder does not only mean physical murder, but it can also come about through the words we say daily to our neighbor. Reading this commandment once again and taking it to heart, I realize that I often find myself struggling to live up to the high standard it calls for. I continually ask myself, why do I allow my tongue to become such a fire? Most people are familiar with the words that Jesus said, you have heard of old, you shall not murder. But I say to you, whoever calls his brother a fool is in danger of hellfire, and whoever calls his brother a worthless fellow is also in danger. what Jesus is telling us there is that it's not just physical murder. We can murder people by the things we say. When I was teaching in the prisons, one of the prisoners was writing it in his journal. He said that he saw someone get stabbed in the back. And I thought it was some sort of prison outbreak. But what he meant was someone was speaking some demeaning things about someone else, stabbing them in the back. We have these expressions in our world that correspond to deep levels of murder. We may have grown up with sticks and stones to break my bones, but names will never hurt me. But sometimes a physical wound will heal, but something said to us, even when we're young, will stay with us for a very, very long time. So we tell the students, if you're going to say something this week, be sure you filter it through 3 gates. Is it kind? Is it true? Is it useful? If it can't make it through all those 3 gates, don't say it. For example, this week my girlfriend and I were arguing about how I prioritize my schoolwork over her. Instead of listening to how hurt she was and realizing that she was simply wishing that we could be together more, I let my ego heat up and take over. I yelled and screamed about how hard I was working, how little time I had for anything, blah, 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 and then said something I wish I could take back. I told her that she was being selfish. Very, very common situation. Someone wants to work on his schoolwork. It usually is the guy, and the girl wants him to pay more attention, and she's really hurt. And he's telling her she's being selfish. I know that my words were unkind, untrue, and totally useless. More than that, I could see that every word I spoke was slowly draining her life. He continues. There's a comment from me here. The focus on the commandment, do not murder, helped him to acknowledge how wrong he had been and the damage he had done. I know that this situation could have been very different if only I had remembered to tame my tongue. I'm planning to apologize for my out-of-control tongue. I think I need to reread the scripture that says that, quote, the tongue is like a small fire that can set a whole forest ablaze. One of the things that comes up in the class is that they read the words that other students had written from previous years, and one student wrote a beautiful, beautiful report on this whole subject of the tongue is like a small fire that can set a whole forest ablaze. And it caught on. Several of the students used that quote in their own reports. This one I call Lab Project. This is a longer one. All of the big reports in class once a week are at least 400 to 600 words, plus journals that they keep. So this is one of the longer ones, but this one also has taken off with students because so many students identify with this experience. See if you identify with it as well. This week I had opportunities for murdering or not murdering other classmates because we were working on a group lab project in my biology class. On Thursday morning, I was tired and not in a smiley mood. While we were working on the project, one of my team members was asking me a lot of questions. Although I didn't lash out at him or call him an idiot, I just answered very curtly, I don't know. That was true. I didn't know. But what I really meant by those 3 short words was, stop bothering me with your foolish questions. While true, my words were neither kind nor useful. I could actually hear myself snapping blandly and impatiently. In my mind, I was thinking, what a stupid question. Why does he think I know the answer to that? He's so frustrating. This is particularly good because he's giving us his inner world. So this student realizes that his words, while true, still had a cutting edge to them. And notice that word, cutting edge. My lab partner was not trying to frustrate me. He was asking politely, and instead of politely letting him know that I did not know the answer, I let my mind go on a machete adventure. I gave in to my lower nature, hacking and bashing his intelligence, thinking that he was stupid and just too annoying to be around. My ego just didn't want to be disturbed. It felt superior, like I was a master talking to a slave. In reality, I was the slave. A slave in Egypt, not yet out of the house of bondage. My lower nature was in control, not God, and it was wounding an innocent lab partner with machete-like thoughts and words. I don't find better writing anywhere today, anywhere. These students are, well, it's like Ralph Waldo Emerson once said in an essay called The Language of the Street. When people are really speaking the truth of their lives, he said, if you cut these words, they would bleed. And that's how I feel about the words of these students. He continues. My lab team met again on Monday night. Once again, I was met with a few questions from the same person. This time, though, I saw the situation differently. He wasn't asking questions because he was stupid. They were good questions, and it showed that he really cared about the project. Also, he was asking because he thought I was smart, and that was flattering. The shift in perspective helped me to think well of him and answer with kindness and patience. Oh, I said, I don't actually know the answer to that. It's a good question, though. Let's find that out. He continues. He seemed pleased, and I felt great. But not spiritually murdering him, by not spiritually murdering him, we were both happier. Instead of taking life from him by thinking ill of him and acting in a manner consistent with my negative thoughts, I became a life giver, acting in a manner that is consistent with my higher nature. I want to continue examining my thoughts and feelings so that whenever I speak, my words will always be kind, true, and useful. And I'd like you to notice this ongoing theme of the happiness that comes to people by simply keeping the commandments. Everybody's, wondering, how can I find happiness? How can I be happy? Well, and we have what I think is the divine prescription in front of us. The simplest of all, keep the commandments. So here's the assignment for this one. Again, a very simple commandment. Rather than say, do not murder, we say, be a life giver. In this commandment, we are called to not murder anyone, physically or spiritually. This includes not destroying their reputation, their character, their hopes, their dreams, their confidence, their relationships, their beliefs, and especially their spirit. If it is not kind, true, or useful, don't say it. This includes destructive gossip, sarcastic put-downs, rude nicknames, even contemptuous eye-rolling. Don't be a killjoy. Be a spirit lifter, not a spirit killer. For 1 week, say nothing unkind to or about anyone. Instead, let your words be kind, true, and useful. Encourage, inspire, be a life giver. For this assignment, we pass out what we call a star chart. And they get 3 periods on each day, morning, afternoon, and evening, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right through the week, where they can give themselves a star if they manage to make it through that portion of the day, saying nothing unkind to or about anyone. And it's amazing how a little exercise, which again they think is kind of silly, you might do it in elementary school, is very, very powerful because it's a way of keeping tabs on yourself, being accountable. And they learn a lot through a very simple exercise like that. Next commandment, fasten your seatbelts. You shall not commit adultery. And the quote we have is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And the reason is that purity and adultery are opposites. You adulterate anything by mixing what's impure with it. And you'll see how that theme will be a deepening one throughout these responses. This girl is writing about what she used to think was heaven on earth, and it was sex. It was a rainy October night, and I was lying in bed all alone thinking about the great sex that my boyfriend and I had enjoyed the night before. I couldn't wait for the next night when we would be getting together again. The way he makes me feel is completely like heaven on earth. I've been told that this kind of intimacy is a sin, but my father always told me, as long as it is meaningful, it is okay. He has told me that if I have sex with a guy with whom I share mutual feelings, and if he also respects and loves me, the chances of getting hurt are slimmer. That mentality has grown on me to the point where I don't really care if I have sex outside of marriage. The only thing that is important is that it means something to both of us. And by the way, this is just an aside, but another course I teach at the college is called Exploring Romantic Relationships. And this week, we talked about sex before marriage. And I heard several of the students talking about, well, if it's a committed relationship. And so then I had them break down, what do you mean by committed? Are you committed for this weekend? Are you committed for this month? Are you, what is it? And they had all these different expressions. Well, if you're on the same page, so what does that mean? And it was amazing to me as you penetrated more and more deeply into the millennial mindset, you came to the point where people actually wanted lasting relationships that would endure for their whole lives and maybe even into eternity, but they were afraid to say it because it's cool to be a hookup person and it's not cool to want a lasting relationship. I want to break that one wide open. Listen to what this girl says and see where she's coming from. It's even her dad telling her it's okay as long as it's meaningful. Here's what she says. To be honest, I sort of know that sex before marriage is wrong. How about that? But when my hormones take over, I don't care. I use my father's explanation as an excuse to gratify my needs, and I push biblical teachings into the background. Before taking this course, this was my mentality. And throughout the course, I have been struggling to accept the fact that it is not okay to have sex outside of marriage. In addition to my father's advice, I had always tried to justify my sexual activity by saying, well, people do much worse things, and it doesn't matter anymore. You've already done it. This continues. But no matter what my father taught me, and no matter how much I have tried to justify it, God has the final say in all things. And he said it in this commandment. Do not commit adultery. I prefer to live by God's word, not man's, not even my father's. If I can do that, I know I will experience heaven on earth. Can I get an amen? It's so incredible. It's incredible that these young people are changing their lives, changing their attitudes, changing their worldviews, changing their beliefs in just a short period of time. I can't promise that it will endure. I can't promise that they're not just making this up. But it feels to me like if I cut those words, they would bleed. How about another one? In class, we talked about the basic meaning of adultery. It means to make impure or to pollute by adding ingredients that contaminate what is supposed to be pure. As I thought about this, I realized that the commandment against adultery is really about keeping my mind clean and pure and not adulterating it with filthy thoughts. Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Whenever I am involved with pornography, my mind becomes impure. When this happens, I no longer see people as people, but only as physical objects. I do not see God in them because my heart is not pure. He continues, for a long time I convinced myself that just watching pornography did not harm anyone, but now I know how much it harms me and how much it distorts the way I see the world. I don't want to look at people and only see them as sexual objects. I want to look at people and see God. I am praying that with God's help, I can win this battle. I don't think I've ever seen a better explanation of blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So, again, there's many, many more examples in the book where the students are talking about their spiritual development, but here at the end of each chapter, there are assignments, and this is one of the assignments. Identify mixed motives. Adultery is mixing what is pure with what is impure. As you go through the day, reflect on what drives and motivates you. Did you do that good deed out of a genuinely pure motive, expecting nothing in return? Or was it mixed with self-interest, thinking that you might get something out of it? The goal is to do good because it is good, not because it will make you look good or because you will be rewarded for it. Identify mixed motives and try to rid yourself of any extraneous elements that might pollute the purity of your actions. Blessed are the pure in heart. And I love couching all of these commandments in other words of Scripture. And you'll see, if you do get the book, that all of the religious traditions say beautiful, beautiful things, just like Jesus here, with blessed are the pure in heart. Okay, so you ready for the next commandment? You shall not steal. Now, this little dog, he's innocent. He's just following his lower nature. There's something about that shoe. But for us, we're not so innocent. Here's a young man reflecting on stealing something when he was young. One of the things I like to do in class is begin with memories of youth. How many of you stole something? Invariably, everybody raises their hand. They all stole something at some point, and they had different experiences as a result of stealing. This is this young man's experience with Pokemon cards. Oh, and so many students still relate to Pokemon. While growing up, Pokemon was the thing that all the kids were playing. We were a poor family just trying to get by, so I didn't have any cards. But my friend had almost all of them. So one day while I was at his house, and he wasn't looking, I took them. When he noticed that he was missing his cards, I didn't say anything, but I felt terrible. My stomach felt like something was punching it, and my body felt hot. When I got up to leave, the cards fell out of my pocket. He continues, the moment we made eye contact, I ran as fast as I could out of his house. I realized that I didn't only steal his cards, but I also lost his trust. It felt as though an evil presence had taken over my body. It felt horrible. I knew I needed to apologize. When I eventually did, it felt good. It felt like my body was being washed by something good and holy. Once again, we get this continual stream of how good it feels to align yourself with the commandments and how horrible it feels to be out of alignment. And we'll see that theme continuing in a powerful way. This next one I want to set up for you because I'm going to take you to the end of the story. But in one of our dormitories, a girl walked into her room and she saw another girl stealing her clothes. And not just borrowing a sweater, but stuffing her clothes into a bag. And she was like horrified that this theft took place before her very eyes. And the girl who was doing it gave her this, what's your problem attitude. So she's writing about how she could deal with something like that. Here's what she says. Some of the girls in the dorm who are not academically minded asked me, oh, this is academic theft. Oh, this is the wrong one. Let me see, did I get these out of order here? Well, you know what, I'm going to go back, and if we come to that one, we'll do it, okay? So just keep that in mind. This is a different levels of theft that take place in the college community. Plagiarism is one that everyone's familiar with. The word plagiarism comes from the Greek word plagios, which means treacherous. Some students don't think it's all that bad, but I tell them it's treacherous, and if they plagiarize, they won't just fail that test, they'll flunk the course, especially in the Ten Commandments course. But this is another form of academic theft. Some of the girls in the dorm who are not academically minded asked me if I could help them with their homework. At first, it was just normal helping, giving them guidance on how to do it. But then it led to me giving them the answers and eventually just doing the homework for them. Was I breaking the commandment that forbids stealing? Yes. I was stealing their chance to actually learn the material, even though they were the ones getting the answers from me, thus stealing credit and grades that did not belong to them. I was equally in the wrong. When it came time for them to take the test, they did not know how to do it because they had relied on me for the homework. I felt bad, not just because they had failed the test, but because I had been their accomplice. This is one that comes up that students were totally unaware of. It's like a basic work ethic. It's like called stealing from your employer. I didn't think this week's commandment, do not steal, would be too hard for me. In fact, I thought it would be pretty easy. I have never had a problem with stealing. Then I read the section in Rise Above It that said basically, if you are slacking off at work, you are taking money that does not belong to you. This really struck me. So I have to admit it. I have a problem with stealing. Every time I go to work, I am stealing money from my employers. The student did not realize that if they slacked off at work, they were stealing money from their employers. But no, they realized it. So the student continues. My student work job is at the art museum. I dread going to work and I put it off as long as I can. So I'm usually at least 15 minutes late. Since there is no supervisor on duty, no one notices anyway. My main job is to carry around a heavy, clunky vacuum cleaner and make sure the carpets are done thoroughly. There is usually a list of other things to do as well, and when I can get away with it, I just do some of the things on the list and vacuum as quickly as possible, sometimes missing whole areas. I also spend a lot of time texting friends. We're seeing more and more of that in the workplace. This week, after I realized that I was stealing from my employer, I made a serious effort to change. I earnestly worked as hard as I could, and guess what? It actually felt pretty good. The time flew by, and I didn't even mind vacuuming that much. Again, align yourself with the commandments, and life is so much better. Live outside of the commandments, and it's drudgery. Here's one. Athlete of the Year. Now we're going to a deeper level. You know how these commandments get deeper and deeper and deeper, and feeling that you're great, Mr. Great or Miss Great, is actually stealing credit from God, who's giving you your abilities. And this young lady is going to write about this. I recently won Athlete of the Year. I kept thinking, how can this be? I'm only a freshman. Why would they pick me over all the juniors and seniors? These were the thoughts that streamed through my mind that day as I was surrounded by family, friends, coaches, and teammates. As it began to sink in that they really did pick me, I kept thinking about all I had achieved during the past year in 3 sports and how hard I had worked. This is one of those, these moments. How hard I had worked. I thought it was all about me and my wondrous talent. The more I thought this way, the more full of myself I became. As people kept congratulating me, my pride kept rising. I was all about self. But she's taking the 10 Commandments course. So she continues. Rise Above It states that an early step in our spiritual development is to humbly admit that we have no power from ourselves. In other words, I cannot achieve anything without God. That's what I learned from this commandment. I need to become a credit giver, but I have always been a credit taker. On that day, I was acting as if all the talent I had was from my own doing, and that all the good fortune I had was from myself. She continues. But after studying the deeper meaning of this commandment, I now realize that although my name is on the stat sheets, God has given me everything, including the ability to play sports. In the Bhagavad Gita, it says, I am always the instrument. I like that statement. It brings up numerous thoughts and revelations for me. It helps me realize that I just might be God's instrument, whether on or off the playing field. The next time people say, good game, I'll just smile and say, thanks. But that thanks will also be thanks to God. And a final one in this series of things that students said. This is on a lighter note, but it carries a really good point. This was a good weekend to practice this commandment, especially since several other members of the Rise Above It class were on the college ski trip. Whenever we complimented each other on a good turn or a nice jump, we would smile, say thanks, and point upwards. We had a good laugh about that. Even though we were joking, it still served as a reminder that we owe everything to God. So there's always an assignment that goes with each commandment. For this one, we took them to the deep level of acknowledge the source. When we believe the illusion that goodness is from ourselves and not from a higher power, it's like believing that the wall outlet in the dorm room is the source of electricity. We forget that the electricity is generated in a power plant. And by the way, in the spirit of this commandment, I want to thank John Odner for this analogy. I didn't think it up. In this activity, you have a chance to acknowledge the source of all the wise thoughts that arise in you, all the loving feelings that flow in, and all the honorable things you do. If someone compliments you, say a simple thank you, while quietly acknowledging the source. Depending on your religious tradition, you can develop a habit of saying to yourself, praise the Lord, Allah Akbar, which means God is great. Thank you, Jesus. Hare Krishna, or quite simply, it wasn't me. This is the essence of humility. We've only got 2 to go now. We've got you shall not bear false witness, and then we're going to do coveting. I didn't finish the story, by the way, about the girl who was stolen from. And I don't want to keep you hanging. I guess that's one I thought about putting in, but decided not to. But she was being stolen from, and it was an amazing experience for her to be confronted with this. But she noticed what was happening. Maybe that'll come up in the next commandment. Maybe I put it in there. We'll see. We'll hang on to that a little longer. If not, that's okay. I'm going to remember the Sabbath. God is the doer, right? We practice all these things all the time. Might as well practice them now. So, are you ready for the next commandment? Here we go. You shall not bear false witness. Well, in a literal sense, there you have it. It's also a form of murder, too. All the commandments sort of begin to coalesce now and come together. But false witness basically is saying things that are not true about others. One of the ways we say things that are not true is we don't even know the other people and we're already making judgments about them. That's false witness. Here we go. Yesterday in our Rise Above It class, we had a quick multiple choice quiz. The quizzes were graded immediately and then handed back to us so we could go over them. When I got my quiz back, I noticed that one of my answers was wrong, but there was no X next to it. I put a little X next to the wrong answers. There's usually just 5 multiple choice questions, quick quiz. But I must have missed this one. So instead of getting a 10 on the quiz, I should have gotten an 8. Now, the quiz was about not bearing false witness. What should he do? For a moment, I thought it would be best to say nothing since it wasn't my fault. My fault, right? But the commandment and the quiz was about bearing true witness. I said to myself, I need to be honest about this. When I told my coaches, that's my wife and I, that I should have gotten a lower grade, they were so happy with me for being honest that they gave me credit for the question. Did we do the right thing, Star? What do you think? Okay, so when I think about it now, I would have been happy even if my grade had been reduced. It just feels good to be honest. And there's that theme. You know, I've gone and bolded these expressions because I noticed this, especially as I was putting the book together, that these young people were feeling good to do the right thing. If you want to feel good, be good. You could use that as an aphorism. It just feels good to be honest. It may seem like a small thing, but it gave me a great sense of relief and inner peace. It will be a good memory. By the way, in the interest of honesty and openness, I think there's a book by that title somewhere called If You Want to Feel Good, Be Good. And so it just sort of popped back into my mind. I didn't come up with it. Okay. You shall not bear false witness. So my comment to the young man on his report when he put it in was, it would have been a lower pleasure to get a higher grade. However, by being honest, and I said to him, you attained a level of happiness far beyond what the higher grade have given you. And I put this into a comment for the book. As the Buddha says, in giving up a lesser happiness, the wise person beholds a greater one. Therefore, let the wise person give up the lesser happiness so that the greater happiness might be attained. Swedenborg talks about subordinating the lower happinesses. We don't have to give them up, but we just have to let them rule us. And we have to let the higher happiness always be first. And the higher happiness is always keeping the commandment. Here's another one of the volleyball story. I was sitting in my Rise Above It class listening to all the stories about how people had tried to keep this commandment during the week. To be honest, I did not see how this commandment applied to me. And I'd like to say over and over again, the students are so surprised by how the commandments apply to them when they thought, oh, that's just kid stuff. I memorized that in grade school. I don't need that anymore. And then the commandments begin to penetrate as they go deeper and deeper, and especially as they hear one another's stories. And this is what happened here. I try to live my life as honestly as I can. I don't lie to other people, and I try my hardest not to lie to myself by making up rationalizations to justify my behavior. Sounds like a good kid. But when I heard the story my classmate shared, I immediately knew the way in which I was breaking this commandment. He told the class about how during his hockey years growing up, he had a rival on another team. It was someone he hated so much, when in fact, they had never even had a conversation with each other. Later in his career, he was on the same team with this player, and they became really close friends. So that was the story, and it triggered something in her, or it awakened an association. I have done the same thing in my life. When I played travel volleyball, there was a certain girl who was the team leader for my club's biggest rival. I hated that club with all my heart, and always looked for chances to put their players down, especially their team leader. I hated how loud she was, and I always took her cheering for her own team as being derogatory towards my team. As we grew older, we ended up coaching for rival volleyball programs, and now we both play volleyball for different colleges that also happen to be rivals. In brief, I grew up hating this girl, and I've continued to hate her my whole life, and continue to hate her now as a rival at another college. She continues, but here's the crazy part. I don't even know this girl. I've never had a single conversation with her. After hearing my classmate's story, I suddenly realized that she could be a great person. Sadly, I never bothered to find out because I was too busy bearing false witness against her. So as we go deeper and deeper into this commandment, the students begin to, and you'll notice how the commandments are getting deeper and deeper, they begin to encounter false witness, not just making up stories about other people, but the stories they believe about themselves. This next student is going to talk about social anxiety, which many students suffer from, even the ones who appear to be social. They have deep-seated social anxiety. Sometimes we see that in a class of maybe 20 students and no one will talk. They're afraid. They're afraid that maybe their opinion will look stupid or people won't like them. Lots of people have that fear, but some have it to a greater depth, and it's labeled social anxiety. So he writes, I have social anxiety that cripples my ability to communicate with others. Most days I would prefer to be alone and speak to no one. It is excruciatingly painful for me to talk to other people. I have all these voices ringing in my head. They tell me that I'm stupid and inadequate. They tell me that other people hate me and feel that I'm annoying them when I try to initiate a conversation. They make me feel afraid, not the people, the voices in his head. They make me want to avoid people. When all I want to do is say hello, they tell me not to. As a result, I am scared to death of speaking to people. Do you remember earlier I talked about people who seem self-absorbed and they won't say hi? Maybe that's not it. Maybe they're suffering from voices in their head that are saying, well, people won't like it if I say hi. He continues, in the readings for this week, there was a powerful teaching from the Quran. It said, if a suggestion from Satan assail thy mind, seek refuge with God. The passage goes on to say that when this happens, we should, quote, bring God to remembrance, and then we will see aright, end of quote. I like that phrase, a suggestion from Satan, because that is exactly how it feels when these lies are ringing in my head. Sometimes it's just pure torture to be in a classroom, dreading that I might be called upon. Sometimes it takes everything I have in me to just remain seated in my chair and not bolt out the door. What a privilege for me as a teacher to know that this is going on with my students. They're not avoiding me. They're not bored with the class. They're struggling with some deep issues, and he's confronting it. And now, watch what he does. This is a triumph. The truth is, I love other people and want to overcome these things that prevent me from relating to them. So today I sought refuge with a higher power. I did this by thinking of 3 positive things about myself that I believe to be true. 3 things that would help me refute the false witnesses that assail my mind. Here they are. I am creative, people like me, and people would like to have a conversation with me. Very simple. And then the best part is he puts this into practice. Watch what he does. I took a deep breath. Then, on 4 separate occasions, I approached someone that I wanted to talk to. My goal was to come out of each conversation having learned at least one new, meaningful thing about that person. This would be a simple feat for most, but for me, it would be a major accomplishment. I am happy to report that it went very well, and I learned a lot from this exercise. I would be lying if I said that I did not feel frightened during these conversations, but in my heart, beneath these feelings, learning something new about someone was actually quite thrilling. And here comes the crescendo. It made me happy to feel that I was expressing and showing love instead of making up a story in my mind that they did not love me. I turned it around. I focused on loving them. He was making up a story that they did not love him. He turned it around and focused on loving them. And then, instead of bearing false witness against myself, I turned that around as well. I started learning the truth about others. This is about not bearing false witness. It's about learning the truth. So nice. So here's the final one in this series on false witness. And we do an exercise in class called Finding the False Cause. We also call it Happy, Joyous, and Free. And we get Happy and Joyous Free from Bill Wilson, who in his Alcoholics Anonymous book says, God wants you to be happy, joyous, and free. Avoid then the deliberate manufacture of misery. It's a great quote. So we took that and called it Happy, Joyous, and Free. We have a program on that. But here we call it Identifying False Cause. So we ask the students to fill out this form. We go through it in class, and they can do it as homework. And I've got a sample of one girl who went through it. There's about 5 significant questions. And she resisted this like crazy. Watch what happens. So we asked her, what happened? She said, a person who I thought was my good friend left me without any explanations. She just walked out of my life. So then we say, well, describe your thoughts and feelings. I am feeling hurt and angry. I'm feeling invisible. My thought is, she's treating me like I don't exist. I'm done with her. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around her. I will never be her friend again. She sounds pretty upset. So we just simply say, would you like to be free of these negative thoughts and feelings? No. I don't want to be free of these thoughts and feelings. I don't understand why it has to be me who has to resolve the situation, especially since I didn't cause it. I'm better off without her anyway. I don't want to ever see her again, and I don't want to worry about encountering her. I'm done with her. Ooh, okay. Then she writes, after not going any further with the exercise, I was very confused and upset last night after the class exercise. I don't understand at all why I was the bad guy. Why did I have to be the one who had to struggle with this situation? I was the victim, and I thought I deserved to be mad and disappointed as long as I wanted to be. Also, I believe that if I felt like a victim and acted like one, I was proving that I was justified in being mad. Continues. After a long discussion with my Rise Above It coaches, again, that's my wife and I began to see that I was believing false witnesses. I was believing this lie. Now she's identifying the lie. If you stay angry, it will prove that she is wrong and you are right. Also, if you give up these feelings, it means that what she did to you is okay. She saw those as lies. I can see how those were the lies I was believing. But the truth is that I can let go of those feelings and be happy. And it still does not mean that what she did was right. So yes, I want to be free of this anger. I want to be delivered from the lies that have been keeping me in the house of bondage to negative thoughts and feelings. Well, as soon as they say they want to be free, then they can move to the next step in the exercise. Can you guess what the next step might be? How do you get free? You just decide to be free? Not that easy. So we say, are you willing to ask the Lord to remove these negative thoughts and feelings? Well, after all, Jesus said, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, will have whatever he says. I say, imagine that these negative thoughts and feelings, the resentment, the anger, whatever it is, that's the mountain. And you don't want to have that mountain anymore. You want it to be removed and cast into the sea. Will have whatever he says. Therefore, I say to you, whatever things you ask when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you will have them. I said, are you ready to pray? She said, yeah. What do I do? I said, well, whatever you like, but why don't you just ask in some way, Jesus or higher power, whatever, ask that this mountain be removed. So, and I've done this with many, many students. And she went into prayer and came out with prayer and said, I'm officially free from the house of bondage. After the shocking realization about how mistaken I have been, a feeling of great relief has been growing in my heart. This has been the most paradoxical thing I have ever experienced. I have realized that holding on to my anger was actually a selfish form of defending my ego. And when I realized how selfish I had been and was able to let go, it actually felt good. Now, that was her written explanation of what happened to her in those few moments of prayer. She came into a new realization that she had been selfishly defending her ego. And she was able to let go of that. And there it is again. It actually felt good. I also realized how dishonest I had been. I had believed the lie that my friend's actions were the cause of my anger. And this is where we talk about false cause. The real cause of my anger were the false witnesses who gave me plenty of reasons to stay angry. We call these wolves in sheep's clothing. They produced so many thoughts, pictures, and associations that I could have stayed angry forever. It was dishonest to accuse her of something that was happening to me. So one of the assignments for this whole commandment of not bearing false witness is a deep one. We ask students to distinguish between the trigger and the cause. And here I'm so grateful to Professor Leon James, professor of psychology at the University of Hawaii. He's the author of the famous book Road Rage, and a good friend who taught me what is really meant by the idea of trigger and how it's actually the associations that are in our mind. So it's beautiful. And I incorporated what I learned from him throughout this chapter, and it was magnificent. And a lot of what I write here is based on what I learned from Leon. As you go through this week, differentiate between external stimuli, triggers, and true causes, the thoughts, feelings, and associations that arise. Instead of saying when Professor Smith gives those long reading assignments, it drives me crazy, say, these thoughts, feelings, and associations that flow into my mind when Professor Smith gives those long reading assignments are trying to drive me crazy. But I'm better than that. I won't believe what they want me to believe, and I won't feel what they want me to feel. I can rise above it. I can say, great, there'll be a lot to learn. Or anything you want to go with. Professor James calls this dishabituation. Give yourself a new response. Try a new way. Develop new neural networks. The brain can grow. All the neurosciences are telling that. By the way, my friend Rick Hansen, who wrote Buddha's Brain, has read the manuscript or portions of it. He says it's magnificent. It's really great. So I've gotten some really good support, but I don't know where it's going to go. And I'm going to need your help and give me some ideas about how I can get this in front of college students everywhere. So here's the task. Oh, well, this isn't quite a task. This is going to set you up for actually that was the task. But this is sort of a little summary of stealing and lying, just this one teaching from the new church. Swedenborg writes in Heaven and Hell. And by the way, I say Swedenborg writes, but many, many people believe that this is the Lord working directly through Swedenborg, and you can make up your own mind about that. If we believed the way things really are, that everything good comes from God and everything evil from hell, then we would not take credit for the good within us or take blame for the evil. Whenever we thought or did anything good, we would focus on the Lord, and any evil that flowed in, we would throw back into the hell it came from. But since we do not believe in any inflow from heaven or from hell, and therefore believe that everything we think and intend is in us and from us, we make the evil our own and defile the good with our feeling that we deserve it. So that sort of summarizes stealing, attributing the good to yourself, and lying, believing the lies that flow in from hell and making those true. And this sort of wraps that up. The 7th and 8th commandments, stealing and lying. I wanted to conclude by inviting you to see a YouTube by Curtis Childs on not coveting. I'm thinking that maybe if the manuscript doesn't fly, maybe hard copy books are not the way to go. We can make a series of YouTubes, maybe something like we're making here today. Here's Curtis Childs talking about the commandment against coveting. And notice how it'll bring together all the commandments. Then I've got 2 more slides to show you after this 5-minute clip, and we'll be finished. So could you come help me bring this one up?
If you believe the context, the 10 commandments in the Bible were dictated by God. But a lot of people don't believe that, because if God, the mind and the heart behind the whole universe, decided, I'm going to give you the 10 most important instructions that could ever be given to human beings, you'd expect them to be awesome, and at least free of any flaws. But they do seem to have flaws. Take the coveting commandment. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, nor anything that is your neighbor's. First of all, it's a little out of date. I don't think I've ever met someone who owns an ox. And if you do get one, I think people might say, oh, wow, you have an ox. But I don't think you're going to run into a lot of ox jealousy, or people trying to steal it away from you. So has the word of God not been able to keep pace with the times? Also, is this commandment just for men? Why doesn't it say your neighbor's spouse? Or what about people who aren't married? Plus, is God sort of lumping women in with property? Also, servants. Is God only saying this to wealthy people and classifying some people as property, and the only reason you don't mess with them is because they belong to someone else? And why just list these things? What if someone doesn't have any of these things? Does God really need to just throw out examples? Or if he did, you'd think that they would be something that applies to everyone. So it seems like there are some issues here that have to be reconciled before you could really feel like this came from God. Of course, you're totally free to come to whatever conclusion you'd like, but here's one thought. In dream psychology, one of the most common and universally agreed upon dream symbols is this. A house is a symbol for our mind. If you're dreaming about a house, often it and its contents have to do with what's going on in our minds. So if dream analysts know that, maybe God knows it too. And if the house really is a universal symbol that speaks to people all over the world, is God speaking to us in that universal language here? Swedenborg says yes. He wrote that even the commandments have a deeper level behind the outer one that applies to everyone, at any time. And in this one, as in dreams, your neighbor's house is your neighbor's mind, any of our minds. The wife in all of us is our longing to do what's right, that which is close to our heart and which we care about deeply. The servants are our critical thinking skills and problem solving, the servants in our minds. I know I want that. Now those skills can serve to figure out how to get me there. The animals are what's connected to the earth, our physical senses, what we enjoy or find beautiful. So to covet your neighbor's wife is to want to possess someone's sense of right and wrong, to manipulate it to get them to do what you want them to do. To covet the neighbor's servants is to want to control someone's rationality and decision making, telling them how to think or distorting the facts so that they end up thinking a certain way, all leading to get you what you want. To covet the animals is to know what's appealing to someone and to use that to lead someone to serve you in some way. That's coveting, because you want your neighbor's life, the heart, the mind, the feelings that are supposed to serve them, are supposed to lead them to what's happy and higher and free, and you want to take those faculties and make them serve you, to have the processes that are going on inside them, the essence of their lives bent and twisted to get whatever you happen to want, to get you votes, or to get you money, or to get you to feel strong, or to feel adored, or to get things done your way, just using people as disposable for your ends. But people's lives aren't yours. They're theirs. There's a special place in the mind that belongs to each person, and don't mess with it unless you're really trying to help them, for their sake. But if you're only after your own profit, don't touch that space. Don't scheme about it. Don't think about how you can get in there. Don't long for it. In other words, don't covet what is your neighbor's. And that's what it means to not covet. And then if you think about that law and the impact that it would have if we all followed it, if people weren't pushing each other into conflicts and wars, if people weren't deceiving each other into buying things they don't need or aren't good for them, if people weren't looking for power in relationships or to be the one in charge, if people weren't willing to do anything to be the center of attention, if no one used someone else as just a tool to get what they want, if we all stopped doing all of that, think about how that would affect the human race, how that would change the world. I mean, looking at it that way, I think, yeah, this could be one of the 10 most important things for people to do.
Okay, so I just have a couple more slides here. At the end of the course, I have my students put together all of the reports and journal entries, look for common themes, and then write a conclusion about what they learned in the course, what they got out of the course. And I just picked a couple of last words. This one student says, I usually detest any kind of group work in classes. We do a lot of group work. When you come to class, you sit in a group with 3 or 4 other students and share what came up for you that week in terms of keeping the commandments. You don't have to share. You're always free to keep it to yourself. But as I said, there's a lot of personal stories. And for students who don't like that, maybe they have social anxiety, I don't know, they detest that. However, something changes. It changed for this young man. I usually detest any kind of group work in classes, much preferring to stick to myself. But I soon learned the value of hearing other people's stories, ideas, and concerns on a personal level. The encouragement that is gained from hearing someone merely relate to your story and realizing that you are not the only one dealing with certain uncomfortable issues in your life is invaluable. One more student. This is the last one. The insightful journal entries that we got to read from past students were very useful. It is enlightening to know that you are not alone in your struggles. Some of the entries really struck me in ways that a typical textbook could not have been able to. Being able to do the weekly journal work and share it with classmates was also very beneficial. It helped me get to the root of the problems because I was looking at them in the light of the commandments. Do you remember the opening picture, the quote from Henry David Thoreau? You know, for 1,000 who are hacking at the branches of evil, there is one striking at the root. That alone is an invaluable skill, and one I hope to continue to use for the rest of my life. I love this idea that the course isn't over, it's just beginning. And thank you. Thank you, Danke, and all the rest of them. Merci. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for listening to this. It's been 2.5 hours. And for me, it flew by in 2.5 minutes. I hope it was like that for you as well. Thank you. I've got time for one question, maybe 2. Yes?
A quick comment and then...
Okay, here's the mic.
All right. This makes it official. But I don't think it's on.
Oh, it's on now.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I just was so struck by the sincerity and honesty and self-reflection and eloquence of the students' comments. And I just think that a course that would bring this out of them is a great course. People are so distracted. I sometimes think everybody's just plugged into their devices all the time. And this was a real human exercise in looking into themselves in the light of objective truths that were placed there. And I just think it's terrific. And my question is to remind you were going to tell us the rest of that one story about stealing the clothes.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. That's left hanging. Well, she was rattled, she was shaking, she was trembling. Ever been in one of those situations where you're just so upset you're trembling? And she remembered to pray. She remembered to pray. She laid on her bed, she put on the radio, and she began to pray. And she noticed that she was calming down. And as she calmed down, she realized that she had to confront this situation. The next morning, she got up and she went to the dean's office, told the dean what happened, got that girl expelled from school, and she knew she had done the right thing, and she felt great. She didn't come into a state of total peace, but she noticed how she was becoming more and more peaceful, something she would not have done if she hadn't have prayed. So she went back to the commandment about not taking the Lord's name in vain, asking God to come into her life and calm her down so she could make the right decision. And it was in the context of the commandment about stealing. It's wonderful how these commandments all knit together. Thank you for reminding me to bring that one up. Maybe in God's good timing, this was the time for that. I notice in God's good timing, that's exactly the end here now. So let's thank our friend for that great insight and question. Thank you. And thank you all. God bless.